Kynan, thank you so much for coming on. You have quite a disparate background, so could you give us a little bit of your timeline?
Sure. Okay. How far do you want me to go back?
I would say post high school,
Okay, great. So
or even high school if that's relevant.
let's leave high school out of this.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, after high school, I guess the most significant thing I did after high school was I went and studied music. So I went to the West Australian Academy of Performing Arts, and I did music technology and music composition. And that was very interesting. Got into different types of music, different types of sound, experimental music, improvised music, electronic and computer music. From there, I followed the digital technologies and computer music path a bit more, and I started making art. So mostly audio-visual art, computer generated.
What is audio visual art?
So I guess there's a range of things. One of the things I was doing was like installations or performances where I converted data into sound and video. And there were different tools being used, but essentially there'd be a video and audio component, and it would be done in either a performance or a gallery.
Okay, what kind of data?
Yeah, a few different things. I was using a whole range of things. One was sleeping brain activity data.
Wow.
That was pretty fun. I did some there was a bunch of different things, but it's not coming readily to mind. This was a while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, how did that lead into your current meditation practice? What was it?
Yeah. So I was working as an artist for a while. I went back and did my PhD in media art, and so I'm from Western Australia, and then moved over to Sydney to start my PhD. And when I was doing my PhD and beginning of the time spent in Sydney, I had a period of pretty bad mental health. So depression and anxiety. Things felt pretty bad for a while. And during that time, I looked at my life and I thought, objectively, if I wrote it down on paper, all the things I have are actually pretty good. I have study, I have a partner, I have a nice place to live, I have friends, I have projects that I'm interested in. But subjectively, how I felt about it was pretty bad. I didn't feel good about it at all. I was pretty miserable.
Do you know what the source of that was?
Yeah, I think there was a few things that have sort of been uncovered. So after that period of time, I kind of got my head above water, and then I got into meditation practice, and that really helped a lot. I think looking back, the cause of what was going on, I was definitely stressed out and overworked and burnt out, and not really realizing it, not having tools to cope with that, not even having an understanding of what that was. I think also I was
Sorry, my cat has just invaded.
Yeah, that was a big part of it. I think the other thing is that I was just really hard on myself in a way that sort of got me stuck in these patterns of thinking, in rumination, in getting, not being able to get out of bed, and then feeling really bad that I couldn't get out of bed, feeling like I'd let other people down. These sort of internal mental patterns that were really unhelpful and kind of kept me stuck in that pretty bad space.
Because I guess clinically, depression is dissatisfaction with living standard, but you would say that that dissatisfaction was self-generated.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I feel like depression has a number of different causes or potential causes, and it's not always clear what's going on. For me, it definitely seemed to be self-generated. It seemed to be how I was relating to things rather than what was actually going on in my life.
So what was your introduction into meditation then?
Yeah, I'd come across meditation a little bit. My dad had showed me how to meditate when I was younger. I didn't really use it much, but I did have a sense of like, oh yeah, that is a thing people do. When I was depressed, I did some like mindfulness. I read about it and I tried it out and I was like, oh, this is great. And then it just faded and I couldn't bring it back. And then I'd done some meditation at the yoga school that I was attending, but it wasn't until, I kind of came out of the depression a bit, realized I needed to like work with my mind a bit more. And then a friend gave me a book on meditation, like a detailed manual on how to meditate. And that's when I got really into it. And that's what helped me to sort of go deeper in the practice to find how meditation could help my situation.
And how did it help your situation?
Yeah, it was pretty transformative. I found that, I guess it's a little hard to say looking back now exactly what happened in what order, but I know that, I'd kind of gotten my head above water, so to speak. I wasn't in the depths of the depression when I was doing yoga and I started getting into meditation. And so I think that's right. Like, I think if you're super depressed, meditation might not actually be the best thing to do. It could just be like you sitting there with pretty dark thoughts, which could be really unhelpful. But the point that I found what it did was help me to find some more calm and more peace, more sense of being able to relax. It helped me to see some of these mental patterns and sort of shift them in helpful ways. And it also, over time, helped me to be able to feel the feelings I was experiencing without trying to change them, reject them, to be able to actually just sort of sit with whatever was going on and allow it to be there. And I think by doing so, it shifted that relationship to circumstances and things that I found unpleasant.
And what perspective did you or have you got on meditation? I know there seems to be two different schools on it, where there's like this new wave, very, very scientific way of viewing mindfulness. And then like the older school, I guess Buddhist, primarily maybe Taoist perspective, where it's much more of a spiritual journey. And how do you view that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I have a kind of mixed response to that, in that it's a bit from column A, a bit from column B. I definitely, to begin with, approached it more as a secular mindfulness scientific practice. You can do this and it will help you with mental health, that kind of approach. And then as it started getting deeper, I found that the stuff that's written about in Buddhism was the stuff I was experiencing. And so there wasn't more of an aspect of like, oh, this is going deeper. There is like some kind of aspect to it of maybe it's spirituality, or maybe some sense of opening to more possibility than just like, this is a purely scientific, rational approach. I had grown up around Buddhism in a way because my dad's family are culturally Buddhist. So I used to go to the monastery, and that made me sort of know a bit about those practices and traditions, a little bit, or at least have some familiarity with them. But I also was pretty skeptical of it. So I've always had a bit of a like skepticism around religious practices.
Healthy.
Healthy, I think so. And so, yeah, the way I see it now is that it kind of depends on what's useful. Some people find that approaching it from the Buddhist angle, taking on all of the stuff around that, maybe the rites and rituals, maybe the ideology, that could be really helpful. For other people, it's much more about the rational scientific approach. There's many different ways of like viewing what meditation practice does. And when I'm approaching my practice, I'm trying to have some flexibility with what feels most appropriate, most helpful of the way of looking at it at that time. And when I teach other people, I'm trying to meet them where they are. And so I guess for most of the people I'm talking to, they want to come at it from I'm talking to people who are pretty similar to me in some way or have some, there's a good fit. So they're mostly people who are, educated on the internet a lot. They have like more of a sense of the, the science behind it. They want to hear like, oh yeah, there's been proof that this works in certain ways, and they don't have to put their faith in something other than like, yeah, there's been scientific proof, or that they can experience it in their own practice.
Well, would you describe yourself as currently a Buddhist or in between?
I would say yes, as long as I get to define what Buddhism means.
And what would you define it as?
Yeah, so I take it as, for me, Buddhism is a set of teachings, and the historical Buddha maybe existed, maybe didn't. It's a bit unclear, but the historians are saying that probably. And he seemed to be like a really amazing figure who had some great teachings, and those teachings seem to point to something about human experience that I don't think has been captured as directly in anything else that I've come across. And so for me, there's something in those teachings and in particularly Buddhist meditation practice, that is really powerful and significant. And so there's also an aspect in the Buddhist teachings of, you should try this out for yourself. You should not believe things just because you hear it, not because it's the teacher, not because it's what your other people are saying is good. You should believe it because you experience it yourself. That should be the highest level of epistemology. So I sort of take that approach of like, I've tried some of the stuff that's talked about in the Buddhist teachings, and I found it worked, to varying degrees, but certainly some of it was really significant, really resonated with me, really made a lot of sense. And so that's what I like to do. That's what I like to tell other people about if they're the kind of person who's interested in listening to that.
So I guess this goes back to the kind of two prongs of meditation, but Buddhism has much the same thing, where it does have almost secular teachings in like trying to push yourself away from going after material things, etc. But then there's the other half, or I guess it's not a half, it's just another part, where it is like reincarnation, etc. And do you still see them as separated, or how do you stand on that kind of spectrum?
Yeah, another good question. Yeah, I like to, after sort of being in this world for a while and doing my own research and reading lots of stuff and doing my own practice, yeah, it's, you come across, actually there's, a number of different Buddhist traditions over the centuries. Over 2,500 years, there's actually been quite a few separate different schools that have taken up the teachings in different ways. And I find that the challenge now is, how do we, for people like me who, I'm a lay person, I'm not a monastic, so I'm not renouncing the world. I'm living in the world and trying to do what I can in the world. For people like me and people I'm talking to, how do we take the teachings, find what is really useful and really valuable, and bring that into our lives? And what creates the most meaning and value there for helping us live in line with our values and do good things? So
would you say for you, it's less about what you believe, more about what has been of assistance to you?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, I guess the style of teaching I do could be considered like pragmatic Dharma, pragmatic meditation teaching, in the sense of like what is most useful, what is helpful, what is of assistance.
That's a great way of looking at it.
And so, you know, with the question of like reincarnation, for some people, believing in that is really helpful. I don't want to deny that. For most people I talk to, they're going to be either, you know, not wanting to go anywhere near that, or at best maybe like agnostic. You know, maybe it exists, maybe it doesn't. And I find that to be an interesting challenge to like see, okay, maybe these different views are true, you know, at different points. Actually, you know, I have no way of proving whether that is a thing or not. If I could prove it, I would, but I just actually can't. So yeah, what is most useful? That seems to be the only framework or lens that actually makes sense for like how I would talk to somebody about this.
But in terms of your personal belief, I guess, is it a yes or no? Would you, if you put money on it, and beyond that, how do you? Oh God, I've got to gather my thoughts here for a second. How do you see the pursuit of knowledge in regards to your own practice? If you go in for what's pragmatic, then by necessity, do you push away what you logically might find to be true?
Oh, yeah, interesting. Okay, if I'm pressed into giving an answer, I mean, firstly, I would say agnostic, like I don't know and I don't particularly care. If I was pressed more, I'd probably say no. Like it just doesn't resonate with how I grew up and my worldview for what that has been for a really long time. So you know that question of reincarnation, I think, is actually a really interesting one. And you know, there's a debate that perhaps the Buddha actually didn't believe that. It was like inherited from previous religions. Anyway, that aside, I think the question of logic versus pragmatics is a good one. I I would actually try to step back out of that question to reframe it. So the question of logic, it things only make sense if you define the domain of them. So, as an example, you know, classical physics works for certain scales of objects, and then if it gets too big, you have to use relativity. If it gets too small, you have to use quantum mechanics, and that's the system that makes the most sense. And so, similarly, I think what actually makes sense and what is useful depends on the frame that you're putting it in. And so to bring it back to meditation, what tends to help people the most seems to be like what helps them to cultivate calm and clarity in their minds, what helps them to feel like they have more resources, more capacity, what helps them to feel like they can choose actions that, you know, they really align with. And that doesn't seem to really conflict with logic on a sort of day-to-day basis. That seems to be pretty clear when you ask people that sort of stuff. And, you know, I have students and they'll sort of not be sure about where their practice is going. And I'll ask them, like, are things better now than they were 3 months ago, 6 months ago? And if they can answer that, like, yeah, daily life is better, then it's pretty clear that there's some practical use there.
Okay. Well, I guess that leads well into why you chose to teach it now, and instead of pursuing a very promising career in your PhD.
Maybe not so promising. I mean, yeah. You know, it was something I'd been interested in for a while, and while doing my PhD and while doing other various projects, I had this sort of sense that I wanted to be doing more that I felt would help people. And I didn't really know what that was until I'd come across meditation and found how beneficial it was for me. And then this feeling kept growing that like, if I could help other people get the kind of benefits or even some degree of the benefits that I was getting, that would be a really good way to spend my life. It would be a really good way to spend my time and energy. And so I'd actually asked my teacher about teaching, and initially I had kind of not so great motivations. It was more like, oh, I don't like my work, so maybe I should teach meditation. And he told me, no, you can't teach. Sort of like, don't ask again. And then I had to go away and like really consider why I wanted to teach. And I think I just came back to that feeling of like what I just described before. Like, yeah, this feels really significant. If I can offer this, that's great. If I offer it and no one takes it up, that's fine too. I'll go back to working in some other field. And it was during 2020 in like the COVID lockdowns and all of that. I didn't have any art projects coming up. They were all cancelled or postponed. And I thought, okay, well, this is a good chance to just like make a clean break and just dive into this new area. And that's sort of my personality as well. I just like to do one thing and commit a lot to it. And yeah, it seems like it's been really good.
So how long were you studying meditation before you started teaching?
I'd been practicing for, I think, about 4 or 5 years before I started teaching, which I think in the scheme of things is not a super long amount of time. I guess when I think about meditation teachers, I usually picture someone who's practiced for decades. But I think the thing was that I had a confidence in like my experience of like, okay, there's certainly more I could learn, but I at least had my own experience of like, yeah, I have noticed a big change and I noticed this to be super beneficial.
And in terms of you felt the need to want to help people, your pursuit of that, would you say that was based in the same kind of pragmatism that seems to be a theme throughout your teaching?
Yeah. I think yeah, so I guess previous to teaching meditation, I was more involved in different activist work, and particularly with the university sector, higher education sector, during COVID and a lot of layoffs and things like that happening. And what I found with that was, it was pretty hard there's a lot of time and energy put into it, and it was pretty hard to notice much change when you're trying to work on a systemic level. And so I think for me, it was partly about trying to do something that I could notice smaller incremental steps, but also I think I want to work more with people and their experience and more in this sort of supportive role, to help people and have that more personal connection.
Well, considering you're based in that activism, do you think your pursuit of doing things that I guess people of your ethical beliefs and my own, of course, see as good, is that based on the pragmatism of making yourself feel good, or is there some greater objective there?
When I was doing activist work, or
even in your current work, yes.
Yeah, I guess the question there, I think there's different kinds of feeling good. So certainly some of the activist work I was doing was to try and fill a void where I felt like I wasn't doing enough, or that yeah, it's interesting, like feeling like the world isn't okay, which is actually a really good motivator, but when it's internalized, it seems like it's not a great way to relate to yourself. So I think the different ways of feeling good, there seems to be a like kind of sense of wholesomeness or goodness from doing something that feels really aligned, really like, yeah, like I just feel like this is a really good use of my time. And even if nothing comes of it, that was fine. It was worth trying to do. And yeah, that sense of doing something because it makes you feel better. I really come back to that idea of like, if I offer this and no one comes, no one wants to learn meditation, that's fine. I'll go do something else. It's like, I heard another teacher say that, you have to teach as if you're offering a gift. If I give you a book, I can't make you read it. All I'm doing is offering the meditation teaching.
Mm. So I guess, was that was your primary activism within climate change?
No, not primary. I'd say I was more in the area of refugee rights and then in the university sector.
Ah, interesting. So I guess a lot of that might come out of empathy and the desire to fulfill empathetic needs.
Yes. Actually, yeah, that is a good point. Some of the work I was trying to do for refugees was coming out of empathy, definitely. And a lot of it was kind of misplaced or maybe not seeing the situation clearly enough in order to take steps that did actually help. Yeah.
But overall, you I guess you prioritize you have pragmatic priorities in terms of your own well-being compared to activism, as in you would rather see incremental progress by teaching rather than trying to systemically change.
Yeah. So one realization I had throughout this sort of period where I was moving from doing more of that to doing more meditation was that I was seeing all this activist work being done that kind of looked at people, like particularly, say, politicians, and, the circles I was in, it was always the right-wing politicians that were looked at as like evil. They're bad people. They're making decisions that they're trying to hurt other people. And the realization that I got from meditation was that, and from also from Buddhist teachings, was that people are interdependent in the sense that there's all these different causes and conditions that go into how a person is. And because they're interdependently existing, they're not just like separate selves that have this agency that, they can actually just choose to be good or choose to be bad. It means that all these people are just doing the best they can. And, this is a really hard thing to think about. It was for me at the time, still is. But someone at the time, it was always Peter Dutton. And, to look at Peter Dutton and think, okay, well, he's acting in ways that I definitely don't agree with, causing a lot of harm through some of those decisions. But, he's a human being. He has a family, he has friends. He is probably, had a number of conditions going into his upbringing that made him that way. He didn't do something wrong to decide to be that way. And so in the Buddhist teachings especially, there's this idea of the three poisons, greed, hatred, and delusion. And what I was seeing is that, we could do all kinds of activist work and yell at people and, block traffic and all this stuff, but it wasn't doing anything to reduce greed, hatred, and delusion. So the idea there is that people are misunderstanding themselves, misunderstanding the world, and it's not through their own fault. This is just like a delusion that everybody has. Not seeing the interconnectedness of things, not seeing how their actions affect others, and so then therefore they act with greed and hatred. And I wanted to do something that reduced the net greed, hatred, and delusion in the world.
Okay, well, a couple follow-ups from that. I guess that's quite a strong view of like nature and nurture and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And how would you do you believe in free will going off of that?
Yeah, so I would actually come back to the like appropriate lens for the situation. So when it feels like, and to be pragmatic about it as well, when it feels like you have free will, would be my answer. You know, when you sit down at a restaurant and you look at the menu and you have to pick something on the menu, there's certainly an option there to choose the thing you want to eat. And I think that feeling of free will is good enough. That means that you should use that well. You should use that that agency that you do have within those situations. Whether or not we have free will from a like philosophical level is just not as interesting to me. But on a meditative level, if you're deep on a meditation retreat, and you're observing where thoughts come from and what the subconscious, you're sort of observing that barrier between the subconscious and the conscious. Does free will exist then? No. And that would actually be a really useful thing to think about and investigate. And being able to see the different sides of it, expand the range of how you can look at those situations, seems to be the thing that brings freedom, brings like the ability to move between those different worlds. And that's how I try to talk about things and try to see things these days. People do have agency, they do have free will, but it's also conditioned, and it depends on the situation which of those is actually more important.
Okay, so that's almost like hyper, I had to keep saying this word, but pragmatic in the way that you will change philosophical outlooks depending on, I guess, what is healthiest for your own well-being. Do you not have the, you said your philosophical desire to understand those kind of things wasn't as interesting to you. But I guess for me especially, I find I need to know those kind of things. Like I can't just decide, okay, in this situation I have free will, in this situation I don't. Do you have that drive to understand those things, or how do you react to that drive if it comes up in you?
Well, maybe first a question. Did you figure it out? Do you have an answer?
No, not at all. Not at all.
So I think my experience is that I could see that asking the question can be really useful, but getting stuck on the question is unhelpful and leads to not feeling very good at all. So that's where I think this like flexibility in the different ways of looking, the different ways of understanding things, actually brings a lot of freedom. And I would also just say that, it's not just for personal well-being. I think there is no personal well-being without, social communal well-being as well. So that's definitely a factor too. It's just that I think there should be a bit of a focus on like what you're doing in your own mind, in your own body, in your own experience, and then seeing how that expands outwards.
So you do, if you get stuck on the question, you do choose to ignore it.
Okay, yeah, the question of free will specifically?
Or I guess just more broadly, philosophical, spiritual views, you seem to shift through quite a lot, depending on the situation, which is something we all do, unconsciously or consciously, I think. But I guess you're sitting there, you're thinking about it. Do you just, okay, I'm not going to think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess for me, I've always been kind of practice led in that sense, like where my meditation practice has gone would then help influence how I felt about things. And I have, I've definitely read and studied a lot of meditation stuff, but trying to bring that back to a practice level and to an experience level, and to somehow, embodying what that is. Yeah, so certainly the questions don't seem to come up as much, and when they do, they don't seem to be sticky. Like there doesn't seem to be, I don't feel like there's a existential quandary there. It feels like there's just more like an existential okayness. Maybe on a pragmatic level, I think when the questions come up, feeling what is driving the question, what is the feeling in the body, what is the sort of underlying need to ask that question, that I think would be like a good practice to do towards self-understanding.
Well, I think a lot of it is like for those kind of questions, it's very easy to track down the kind of meaning, but what do you do with that meaning once you find it? For instance, if is reincarnation real? Where does what's coming up? What is causing that feeling? It's fear of death, is frequently it. And I guess just like, in an uncaring universe, is it all for naught? And those kind of things. What do you do with those feelings once you do locate them?
Yeah, great question. This is one of the strong points of Buddhism, I think, is that it's pretty dark, right? I just bumped into a monk on the way here, which is not a phrase I get to say very often. But he's leading a class tonight on death contemplation. There's like an aspect of this about like, okay, we want to see existence and reality as it is. It will probably bring up fear and sadness and grief, but seeing it clearly is what is going to bring more understanding and wisdom and more well-being and better relationships and a better relationship with this life that we're in.
Okay, but does seeing it clearly then involve having a philosophical point of view?
I think, say with death, I think it does sort of, this is the theme, but it seems to come back to, empiricism and pragmaticism. Like, what do you experience in your life, and what actually seems to help, what seems to do something? So for death, yeah, that's a really good question, actually. So there would be a conflict there, if someone is saying they believe in reincarnation or they believe in the afterlife, in heaven, hell, that sort of thing. But then they practice Buddhist meditation, they would probably be faced with this this problem that, everything is impermanent. And if we can't know of that stuff beyond life, what do we do with that? And so I think the way to resolve this is to see that those beliefs, they can be incredibly useful, but they don't exist as solidly as you might think. So another key idea in Buddhist practice is this idea of emptiness, which said another way is like interdependence or fullness. So, this microphone that's in front of me, this is the sum of all the different causes and conditions and it's, it being right here in front of me right now is like, it takes the whole universe to do that. The microphone doesn't exist on its own, from its own side. And so I think what this idea is, the reason this is important is like to see that a lot of this stuff that we're dealing with, it's appearing in the mind. The mind is a big part of what is happening in our experience. The mind is like fabricating things. The mind is combining all the different sensory information and turning it into this like continuous narrative. And there's an aspect here of like the matrix, right? We don't exactly know what's outside the mind because everything is in the mind. And so understanding this and, practicing with this and with these ideas helps you to see that like, yeah, maybe that idea, that philosophical idea is quite helpful. Maybe it's interesting, maybe it's useful, maybe it feels logical or feels right or true in some sense, but it is also an idea in the mind. It is also being created, being fabricated in your experience. And, these are pretty kind of heady topics. And maybe this short discussion won't give a proper sense of this, but what the understanding of emptiness seems to do is that it creates this lightness, this ability the flexibility to shift between different views, to understand that beliefs are not quite as fixed as they might seem they are. And there's actually a bit of room there to pick up and put down which ones seem the most helpful, seem the most useful.
So in regards to that, do you see a more universal set of ethics, or do you think it's entirely personal? For instance, I guess like Bonnie and Clyde loved shooting people up, and that probably made them really happy. But is there something, I guess, and within their own brain matrix, that's like 2 thumbs up. That's great for them. But outside of that, in the shared universe, we would see that as ethically wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think ethics is both personal and social, communal. I don't think there is any absolute to say, yeah, it's just what you decide is right and wrong. But it's also not completely external. If we try to come up with a list of ethical rules that would apply across the planet, I don't think we can quite do that. There would be a line that it becomes fuzzy, right? So yeah, I think actually it's more about stepping back and seeing both of those as slightly fuzzy. It is both personal and social.
So it's either personal, social, but there's nothing beyond that, because I mean, there's so many social groups that have come up with things we would find abhorrent today. The Spartans, for instance. So how do you react to that? Is that I guess if you were, I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of the Spartan society, but they're not very nice. And the social structures they were in thought that was ethically good thing to do. The individuals thought that was an ethically good thing to do. Do you think there's something beyond that, beyond that matrix that would basically clash with those ethics?
Yeah, interesting. I don't know much about the Spartans. Was there anything external to the Spartans, or that was it? That was all they?
Of course, there was external people around Greece, for instance, but basically all of Greece looked up to Sparta as like the idealistic state. But they were, I don't know what Spotify's laws on talking about this kind of stuff, but they did very not nice things to their children and killed a lot of people and
right,
etc.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So if there is something universal, or at least more broad than social, I think it comes from this like self-understanding of what causes you pain and what causes happiness, and being able to actually see that in other beings. So to be able to bring a sense of understanding, like I was saying before, that every being is is made up has causes and conditions. They're not just an individual that solely has agency. They also are within a sort of set of causes and conditions. And being able to see in other beings, like, oh yeah, that being is clearly in pain, and this is not good. This is not a skillful action. It doesn't lead to the sort of greater good. Yeah, this is a really good question though. So I guess I'm answering this in a sort of Buddhist way, which is that to say that like the Buddha taught, that loving kindness, and to wish all beings be happy and free, even though that's clearly not possible, and we can't just make that happen. But to try to view other beings with compassion, to view them as you would view yourself, to treat other beings with kindness, out of an understanding that there is interdependence, and that hurting others is also hurting yourself in a sense, or hurting the collectivity.
But I guess that is a philosophical or spiritual concrete viewpoint based in like interconnected empathy, which I guess goes somewhat against the other teachings you have, in that it always viewing others, or basing your own how you carry yourself in trying to help others, in understanding that others' well-being is important to you. That is in itself its own philosophical concrete viewpoint, because that doesn't necessarily work in a lot of historical situations or in modern situations, where inflicting pain and death on other people frequently is purely good for that individual.
Yeah, so I think the flexibility with the views here is like to be able to sometimes actually have strict ethical guidelines. And these exist in Buddhist practice, and they exist in society, and they're very helpful, and they can give us a guideline of what to do, and we can use those. And then when it gets into some kind of gray area, I think if people are psychotic,
but it's not necessarily psychotic, it's societal and individual.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to forget the Bonnie and Clyde example from earlier.
Yeah.
The societal and individual question of like, should you kill people, I think is pretty clearly no, on the societal front for sure. On the individual level, I think it's also no, right?
Of course, I agree.
From your own experience.
But my question, I guess, is who decides that ethics, that killing people is bad? Because in a lot of societies, killing people or certain people is seen as good.
I don't quite know how this got to be our line of questioning. Can you just like back up why this is?
So just I'm just trying to see if there are concrete, sturdy philosophical viewpoints that base your practice, or if it's all based on pragmatism. Because it does seem like the Buddhist ethics, which of course I am part of those ethics. I fully concur with those ethics. But I would like to know what you base those ethics on, why you base those ethics on them, who decides those ethics. Because it does seem like if the universe decides the ethics, that does imply some level of spiritualism.
Oh, okay. I think I understand. Yeah, okay, on the personal level, I think it's, we might have some guidelines, we might have some ethical guidelines, and they are very useful. But primarily, I think on the personal level, we have to see for ourselves and come up with our own ethical frameworks. And we have to keep calibrating those because I think ethics change in different situations. Obviously, on a societal level, there's, rules that help us function with one another. On the universal level, I don't know if I can say anything that doesn't sound like an absolute cliche or completely woo-woo, but
Nothing wrong with that.
but like, I think, perhaps from my own practice, my deepest experiences in meditation have shown me, interconnectedness and this sense of oneness and this sense of love, like this love for the universe and this wonder and awe that we get to live in this incredible universe that's incredibly vast and complex. And we are somehow conscious and aware of it and get to choose actions within that. We get to learn about it. We get to experience this richness and fullness. And there's just this incredible beauty to that. And I think that does have an ethical dimension. I think when you feel that and when you see that, it makes you want to preserve life, or it makes you want to do what you can to make life better for others.
Oh, that's a great answer. And I think I'll use that answer to follow into my last question. I'm sorry, I know we're running a little low on time, but I guess going back to your views on people like Peter Dutton and like your interactions with viewpoints completely separated from your own. And you said about the greed, hatred, and delusion and reducing those. Is that practice, your meditation practice, do you see that as the best way of doing so and interacting with those viewpoints? Because I'm sure that a lot of the people that would come to you already, if you're going to a meditation practice, you're probably a pretty ethical person already, without generalizing too much. I'm sure that most of your clients are of certain socioeconomic ethics and political viewpoints. So how do you see, I guess, greed, hatred, and delusion, and how do you seek to combat that?
Yeah. So So the ways that greed, hatred, and delusion are showing up, there is definitely an ethical dimension to it. And this may be apparent all the time or just at those kind of key moments. Should I keep working for this big company that is, not operating in the most ethical way? And in those moments, can you, and that's not to say that the decision should always be leave your company. Sometimes the decision is to stay and, do what you can. But just to say that those greed, hatred, and delusion are operating all the time, according to this theory, according to my experience. It's just that they're happening at different levels, and they may become more apparent at those key moments. In my own practice, certainly, actually, I'll come back to that. In my students, what I'm seeing is, certainly people come to the practice, they're already living certain ethical guidelines. They, have high expectations of themselves and of society, and I think that's really good. It's just that the way these are operating in the mind is what seems to be creating unhappiness. And so people might be acting really well outwardly, but internally aren't feeling happy. Or they might be struggling to find the capacity to act in the way that they actually want to. So in my own practice, I think I'm gonna keep working on this. They're definitely still there. I still have delusion where I react in a way that doesn't match up with the situation. I'm feeling hungry and I get mad at you for what you said. And it's not because of what you said. It's just I'm confusing what's like inside with outside. And so I'm going to keep working on greed, hatred, and delusion for sure. For me, meditation practice is a really big part of that. But I also do other practices. I do therapy. I have been learning more communication skills. I've been trying to, learn different things that help me be in the world in better ways as well. And I think that's a really important part of it too. It's like how we take those resources in that space and that okayness that we find with our experience and actually bring that outwards into the world. And so, yeah, that's sort of what I'd recommend people do, is like look at your own experience, work with that, especially if there is like, big stuff going on, if there is difficulty in your experience and if there is room to work with your mind and relate to your experiences in better ways, definitely do that. And reducing greed, hatred, and delusion is one of the benefits of that goes outward into the world.
Well, that's a fantastic answer and a great point to end, I think. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.